Hello and welcome to the Ourdadsstamps YouTube channel, where we talk about all things related to stamps and stamp collecting. My name's Pete West and I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please click on the like button and don't forget to subscribe to get regular updates on new content. Hello from Ourdadsstamps and welcome once again. And welcome Sheila.
Nice to be back, Pete.
Good to have you. The subject of today's podcast is a scandal that rocked the stamp world in Spain in the not too distant past. And ever since I've come to Spain, when I tell people that I collect stamps or I buy and sell stamps, almost everybody tells me about this scandal. And in fact, they've even told you about the scandal as well, haven't they, Sheila?
They have. This is the conversation I had with a friend the other day that gave us the idea for this podcast.
Indeed, indeed. So thank you very much for that idea. And it's quite outstanding how big the scheme got before it was shut down. It involves two companies that were very well respected in Spain. One was called Filatelico, which was a stamp house started in the 80s and had spread throughout Spain and was the biggest stamp dealer in Spain at the time. So much so that they even sponsored one of the Spanish basketball teams, Valladolid, who were a mid-table first division basketball side. And for those of you who are not so sure, basketball is the second most popular sport in Spain. So it was quite a big thing that they sponsored one of the teams. And the other company involved, Afinsa, actually ended up being the third largest collectibles company in the world. So these companies involved weren't sort of small time. They were big and well respected companies. But between them, they created one of the biggest frauds in Spanish history. What they did, they hit upon a scheme, and they seem to have done this simultaneously. I'm not sure there was any collusion between the two companies, but they both seem to come up with it at the same time, where they used stamps as an investment material. At the time, the maximum return you could get on interest from the banks in Spain was about 3.5%. But these two companies offered returns of 7% per annum. And what's more, they guaranteed those returns. So it was an attractive proposition to people. And as I'm sure many of you are saying now already, but you can't guarantee those sort of returns on stamps. And we know that, but a lot of these people that were investing weren't stamp specialists and trusted the names of these two companies. The way it worked was they encouraged people to invest a certain amount of money, and they were very clever, of course they would have to be to pull this off. But they said to these people, we will buy stamps for you to that value, and because stamps are quite delicate and quite small, we'll actually keep them in our safe for you to save you all the bother of having to look after a valuable item in your home. So people gave them money for stamps that they never actually saw. And these stamps were either vastly overpriced, in some cases up to 1,000% more than the actual value of the stamps were quoted to people who invested in them, or the stamps were frauds. They were copies. These companies actually made the copies and used them as the device for selling, or in some cases they didn't even exist. It's just, give me the money, I'll buy some stamps for you. You don't need to worry what stamps I'm buying. We'll give you a 7% return. And once they got some investors in on this basis, those investors were then encouraged to attract other people, more and more people. And it developed into a pyramid scheme, a Ponzi scheme, so that the only way they get their money back was if more people invested in the stamps. And it's estimated that there were 350,000 investors that were affected by this scheme. That works out as 1 in every 100 Spaniard, which is quite an outstanding coverage of people. these people obviously weren't well versed in stamp collecting, so weren't really aware of the value of individual stamps if they ever got to see their stamps, and certainly weren't aware that the value of stamps generally don't go up by that much each year. They may go up, but they may also come down, and they may stay the same. So for a company to guarantee a 7% return was ridiculous, quite frankly, but they seem to have got away with it. It is estimated that by the mid-2000s, Forum Filatelica had 3.8 billion euros outstanding in investment contracts, and Afinsa had 1.2 billion euros outstanding. So the amount of money involved were incredible as well. And this was allowed to carry on for several years. And the reason they got away with it was that the Spanish Economy Ministry didn't recognise stamps as a financial product. Therefore, they weren't regulated to do this. There was no control over people doing this. So it was allowed to continue. Alarm bells started to ring, but it was really not until 2006 that the authorities got wind of what was happening, and they raided the offices of the companies and realised just how much was involved and how many people were affected. And so both companies were shut down. And one of the chief executives of Afinsa, a guy called Francisco Guijarro, they raided his property and found 10 million euros in bags of 500 notes in an underground garage that he was just stashed away. Eventually, and this is still going on now, there are still court cases going on trying to recover the money for the people that were unfortunately caught up in this. There were numerous, how can I put it, numerous nefarious activities from different people. For example, one of the founders of Afinsa, Albertino de Figueiredo, he put everything, he bought property and cars and valuable items and put them all in his wife's and children's name. So although he's been caught and imprisoned, the money can't be got back because it's not in his name. Now, the courts or lawyers are actually trying to get the money from his dependents, because obviously they must have been involved. They can't not have known something was going on. But at the moment, as I said, people still haven't got their money back. Another one, Manuel Carlos Yorca Rodriguez, went to Venezuela and had cosmetic surgery so that no one's actually found him. It's quite incredible what these people have got to get away with it. In all, 20 out of 27 defendants were convicted and sentenced to various terms of imprisonment. These defendants were like the senior members of both companies, ranging from the worst or the longest term was just 12 years. 12 years, 4 months and 16 days for some reason or another. I'm not quite sure how they came up with that figure. And he was also ordered to pay 49.7 million euros compensation. Now, I'm not sure how they can get that out of one individual who's siphoned off all the money somewhere, but hopefully they will get it back. And most of the others serve sentences between 4 to 6 years. So, in my view, that really wasn't enough to make up for the damage they have done. Because it was a word of mouth scheme and you were recommending friends and relatives, a lot of it were people putting the money they'd put aside for their pension, they decided to invest. And a lot of people have been left destitute by this fraud. So it was a particularly unpleasant time in the stamp world.
I think listening to that story is a couple of things I would like to comment on. I think the first thing, when the bank was offering like 3% interest rate, you are offered a scheme that is guaranteeing 7%. Getting twice as much as the bank is obviously attractive. That's the first thing. Secondly, it was guaranteed. Now, as you say, it wasn't classed by the government as a financial product, because whenever we see advertisements for financial products, it always has a disclaimer that, the value can go up as well as down. So everybody's aware of that. So, I can see why people were interested. Oh, look, 7% as opposed to 3% in the bank. The second thing is, I would love to have had a look at that contract. So presumably when you purchased a portion of these stamps, you were given a document, i.e. a contract.
I presume so, yeah.
That legally said that you own a percentage or whatever. So that would have been interesting to look at. And I think the other thing, all of a sudden this company is drawing in hundreds of thousands and millions and billions in the end of revenue. Surely that has got to be registered on a end of year tax form. And I'm surprised that the Spanish tax people didn't think, okay, all of a sudden these two companies are declaring money that has just gone through the roof. So that, I would have thought they would have jumped on that straight away. Obviously that didn't happen.
Well, apparently there were rumours going around and suspicions going around for quite a few years, and people were trying to get cases exposed, but the authorities chose not to pursue it any further up until, as I said, in 2006 when they raided the offices. So it seems they seem to have got away with it because of complacency of the Spanish authorities.
I think another thing I wanted to sort of comment on was the fact, if we get some information from a family member or a friend about an investment opportunity, that's always a tricky one, because we would, in theory, trust our family member, trust our friend.
Exactly, yeah.
That they are not going to give you information that is maybe not quite 100%. On the other hand, unless they are quite savvy in the world of finance, would I take a punt on a family member or a friend saying, look, Sheila, you need to invest 1,000 euros in this ASAP, if not more?
I think one of the ways they got away with it was once people had invested their money, at the end of each year, they would send them a statement, which was only a piece of paper, but on that piece of paper it said, you bought X stamps for, say, £1,000. They are now worth £1,700 or £1,070. And because it was written down that it's gone up, people accepted that as fact, and nobody seemed to bother to check the catalogues. Although saying they never checked the catalogues, the company Afinsa actually produced catalogues, so they could easily have been masking it in their own catalogues. I'm not sure.
I think the thing is, you have an option of putting your money in a bank or in your pension or in a mortgage, and we like to think that's relatively safe, but we all know that is actually not the case. And the other thing is, I think we tend to look for an investment opportunity which is a bit sexier than a bank. Whether we want to invest in art...
There's nothing more sexy than stamps, eh?
Well, I'm not quite sure about that. Whether it's investing in gold, whether it's investing in art, in wine. And, if people are lucky enough and they do have available income that, they don't need to put in their pension or their mortgage or paying off a loan, that type of thing, I think people do tend to look for something a bit sexier than shoving it in the bank, which I can understand as well. But I think there are so many red flags in this. Would I personally invest in stamps if I don't know anything about it? Highly unlikely. Would I invest in wine? Again, highly unlikely. Don't know anything about wine. So it's one of those things. And the other thing that really, really surprised me is the man that had all this money and then he put it in the name of his wife and his family, so that if anything went wrong, he couldn't be touched. You cannot tell me the wife, particularly, we don't know how many other family members or if they were children were involved, but if you came to me and said, Sheila, I'm going to put £12 million in your name, I would probably say, okay, I think we need to have a bit of a conversation.
Yes, indeed.
Unless she was totally in it as well, which may well have been the case.
Yeah. As you say, she must have known something was going on.
Absolutely.
She may not have been fully involved, but
Absolutely.
must have known something was
Absolutely.
going on. And therefore should, in some way, recompense the people that have suffered from this.
Exactly. I mean, I think that the whole thing is an amazing story, but I think there are so many red flags along the line. But that's probably easy to say if you're
in
not
hindsight,
an
it's
investor.
probably easy to say. And as I said right at the beginning, these two were basically the two most respected companies in the stamping world in Spain. So it wasn't like it's some start-up company. It were two very established names. So to have got involved in this does seem strange that they went down that route.
So let's pick that apart then. How did that happen? Did they sort of have their Wednesday morning board meeting and go, okay, maybe we should come up with a scheme? And they sat there together. They may have designed a couple of stamps, we're not actually sure, and thought, okay, this is what we're going to do.
I guess so. I guess, the people in charge just got greedy and looked for new ways of making money.
I mean, I think the whole story is absolutely remarkable. And I guess it would be interesting to have a conversation with somebody who was involved in this. So if anybody knows anybody who knows anybody's cousin twice removed in Spain who was involved in this, we would love to hear from you.
From going through the papers, the Spanish papers over the last few weeks researching this, there's loads and loads of news coverage about it. As I said, still the last sentencing was done in 2018, so it's only a few years ago. But I know there are demonstrations going on in various places around the country still of people that have been caught up in the scheme and are owed money, and they're still trying to get it back, and there's still lawyers working on their behalf trying to get the money back from them. So there's plenty of stories out there, but there's also some sad stories of, there's estimated that something like, I think it's about 15% of the people that invested have passed away because they were of that age when they invested. So they've lost their life savings and never saw any benefit from it. And a lot of shame involved as well. So whether people would willingly want to talk about it is another matter. But
I mean, that's a good point, because this happened in the early 2000s. Is this the sort of thing young people would invest their money in? If you think of the average age of a stamp collector, I should imagine, and I could be completely wrong here, I should imagine this is particularly the mayores, the retired people in Spain.
Yeah, I think it was mostly.
Have grown up during their life using postage stamps, maybe got collections of their own, etc. So as you say, I'm not surprised a high percentage as the older generation who may have been more trusting, particularly a family member recommends this sort of scheme. I mean, I cannot believe, in theory, something like the world of stamps, this is the sort of thing that happened. I think it is criminal, and it's incredibly sad.
Yes, it is. There is one saying that you hear over and over again when you're in the stamp world, particularly when you're buying and selling stamps, is, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And I think that may have been the case in this instance. But as we said, it's easy to say in hindsight, and at the time, I can see how people got caught up in it. So
I think it's an absolutely fascinating story, and it would be great to hear the story of somebody who was unfortunately involved in this.
Yes,
and how they got involved.
It would be. Yeah, it's not a nice story really about stamps. Generally, when you meet stamp collectors, when you meet people in stamps, they're always nice people, and they're always helpful people. But obviously, this lot weren't so nice. So there is an interesting sort of byproduct of this, though, that having lived in Spain now for about 15 years, whenever we go to a town anywhere in Spain, there is always a Sunday stamp market. In Madrid, in Barcelona, in Valencia, Sevilla, just about everywhere we've gone to visit, I can always go on a Sunday morning, I can always find a square somewhere where people are trading stamps. So it's still a very, very popular pastime in Spain. And I wonder whether this has contributed to it or whether it was always that way and actually this scandal detracted from it. I'm not sure. Interesting. Okay, well, thanks for listening. I hope you found that interesting, if not a little depressing, but...
Well, I think buyer beware, and that's in absolutely anything, just buyer beware. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Absolutely. So be careful out there and enjoy your stamping. See you in a couple of weeks' time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Don't forget you can visit my online stores at eBay and Delcamp under the name of Ourdadsstamps, where I have over 2,000 items for sale. Please join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of Ourdadsstamps podcast.